is Key Duplication. It's not just for the movies. My name is Tony Varelli, aka Bite Stealer, or some people just call me Bite. You can find me mostly on Twitter if you want to talk, and that's twitter.com @Varelli. I am a member of the Open Organization of Lockpickers, or TOOOL, and I'm based out of Iowa, and I'm a member of the Des Moines chapter there. So I highly encourage you that after this talk today, stick around, keep checking out the Lockpicking Village in DEFCON safe mode. We're going to have a lot of great talks going on, a lot of really smart people when it comes to locks, bypassing them, and physical security. So I highly suggest you stick around for those talks as well. Today I'm going to cover two types of key duplication. The first one I'm going to cover is how you can 3D print a key, and the second one will be molding and casting a key. This gives you two different attack vectors, specifically because in option 1 of 3D printing a key, you never need access to that key. And with option 2, we can go a little bit further with what we can do on complexity of keys. You're not limited to the key type, we'll say. So first we're going to cover 3D printing, and it's way easier than you think. There's a few things you're going to need, obviously, which is a 3D printer, the material you need, and I'm going to go through that entire list now of what you need. So first of all, you're going to need a 3D printer. The 3D printers I work with are an Ultimaker 2 Plus, and I also have a Prusa i3 MK3S. These are just the printers I own. That's why I use them. If you have your own printer, it should work well. Some lower end printers, sub 200, sub 100 printers might have problems with this. But if you're experienced with 3D printing and you know how to really dial your settings in and get it configured just properly, you might have success with even some lower end cheaper printers. A lot of questions I get about the 3D printers are, what size nozzle diameter do I use? It's a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, and I normally print at 0.1 millimeter layer heights. You could get away with 0.2 millimeter layer heights. I just go for the 0.1, especially if you're doing higher security keys. And I use PLA plastic all the time. You could use something stronger if you wanted to, but PLA works perfectly for what we're doing here. The next thing you're going to need is the key you want to duplicate. Now, you absolutely do not need to have access to this key. I can't be the only person who has a friend on Facebook or other social media who is not security conscious, and they're new homeowners or something along those lines, and you see this picture where they're like taking a big smiley picture and like holding their keys up. If you get the right angle on that key, you can take that photograph and use it to duplicate a key. If you are a real-world pen tester, and you can get a photograph of a key, for example, if you have the ability to walk up to a security desk and on the background of the wall there's keys hanging there and you can get a photo of those, that's all you need. If you can get a photo and you can identify the type of key, you can use those to duplicate the key from a photo, which is a really cool attack vector compared to casting and molding a key, because that you do require access to the key for at least a short period of time. For the examples I'm going to show today, I just did a basic quickset KW1 keyway. And then you're going to need a measuring tool. This isn't 100% necessary, but it makes life a lot easier, which is a key gauge. If you have physical access to that key, a key gauge lets you very quickly just move the key through the key gauge to get the bitting depths, the cut depths of that key. So you can quickly just know, okay, that's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 3, so on and so forth, depending on your key type. When you're working with photos of a key, though, you're going to need a pair of calipers. Calipers make your life super simple. You can get a cheap pair for like $20 or less off Amazon.com. And digital calipers are, I prefer digital calipers because they just read off very quickly. And then if you're going to do photos, I highly suggest taking a look at Deviant Olaf's GitHub repository. He has a repository called Decoding. And on here, he has photographs for all these different key measurements. If you look on the screen, you can see just a couple like American, Master, Quickset, Schlage, Sargent, EL. A ton of them are up there. It's a very awesome resource for decoding keys. Here's an example of a Quickset one he has. It shows the entire key from tip to bow. And on that, it shows the spacing you need for the cuts. And then on the bottom right-hand side, it shows the depths you need to make for each of the depths. So one depth is 8.36 millimeters, so on and so forth, all the way across. So it's very cool that you can use this for a reference. I'm not going to cover filing keys down, but this would be very good for that kind of reference if you're measuring to have that information. He also has photos on his repository that look like this. And where these come in use is when you have a photo of a key. So for this example and for this presentation, I just went out and searched quickset key on Google Images. And I got this key, I brought it into Photoshop. Now you can use any photo editing software you want. I happen to have Photoshop, but you can use GIMP or anything else. And what you do is you bring the picture in of the key, and then you cut out the key profile for the most part, and you scale it down to be to fit on the photo here that you get from his repository. So here's a picture that I brought in and scaled down off Google Images. Now, it may not 100% line up all the time, depending on how much you fiddle with it. But the good news is that it doesn't have to be that precise to get a basic idea of your depths. So if you start at the bow of the key, what someone might call the back or the handle, and we work our way to the tip of the key, we can see here that the first depth cut is about a 7. Now, I don't see the line for the 7, but I can see it's shorter than the 6. So it's easy for me to assume that's a 7 cut. And if I move to the next cut there, we can see that that's a 5 cut. The one next to it's a 5 cut. We jump up to a 4 cut, and then we go back down to a 5 cut. So we have the code for this, which is 75545. This is a horribly bitted key, except for that far back deep cut on the 7. But now that I have this information, what can I do with this? This is a great way to get a photo and get the depth cuts, but how do I take this and model a key? So a lot of people don't have the skill or ability to sit there and get the warding cut into a key and the proper size, height, and all this, the right angles. That would take a lot of work in using something like Fusion 360, AutoCAD, SolidWorks, whatever you want to use. Well, that's where a great talk that I believe happened at DEFCON 21 occurred. In the credits, I'll have a link to that talk that's on YouTube, I believe, and all the people who are part of that talk. But it was something along the lines of key duplication and defeating high security Primus locks. And the people who created that created a software called Keygen, and they launched a website called keygen.co. This website is absolutely amazing. In your type, you select the type of key you're working with. Your outline might be like if it's a 5-pin, a 6-pin, 7-pin, whatever, master lock, padlock, a 4-pin. And then your warding type, depending on which key you're using, might have a different warding. And then using the previous slide where you figured out the cuts, like a 75545, you just simply enter that number combination into the bidding and hit generate, and this generates an STL file. For those of you not familiar with 3D printing, an STL file is the base file you use as your 3D model to generate your 3D prints. So here's a quick video demo of me using the site. This is not the key I showed you previously, it's just a demo real quick, but this is a quickset. On quickset, they only have the KW1 keyway and warding. And this is a bidding I entered for a test key I have for an actual lock I own. It's 25363. I hit generate. It takes a couple seconds here, and then it generates this beautiful 3D render of the key. I mean, they even have the end of the key to match what it would actually look like on the key. You hit download STL. It downloads this STL file to your computer. And then I open this up real quick in Windows 3D File Viewer. They call it Print 3D. And this is just a basic idea of how it imports. It's an absolute perfect replication of a quickset key. At the time, I was printing this on an Ultimaker 2 Plus, and the slicer software I use for that is called Cura. If you don't know what a slicer software is, it's a software that takes into 3D printers print on layers. This slices that software, or it slices the STL file into layers so that the 3D printer can print. Now, I don't print vertically like this because it makes it very unstable and weak, and it wobbles as it prints. So the first thing I do is I rotate it flat down to the bed. And in this preview, you're going to see this big ring around the outside. That's called a brim. It just helps bed adhesion. When I actually go to print it, I don't use that brim. I do print with supports depending on the warding, but for the most point, you don't need to use even supports on that. So here's just a quick time lapse. I'll probably skip ahead. I'm not going to watch the whole thing on this, of my Ultimaker printing that exact key we just showed modeled. So if you're not familiar with 3D printing, this is just a quick overview of what that looks like. The gap you see on the bottom is part of the warding. I didn't do supports on this one because I didn't need them. And you can see towards the top there, there's a little bit of stringing between the cut. That's simple. When I'm done, I usually take an X-Acto knife and just clean that up. It doesn't really affect a quick little cut with an X-Acto knife. Cleans up any stringing or weird little print artifacts that you may receive on the print. So this gives you the general idea. We don't need to watch the whole print. On average, this print takes between 10 to 15 minutes, depending on your printer. But it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to knock out an entire key print. So this is the quickset lock I modeled, or that I modeled the key off of. This is the key I printed. You can see I stopped it early. That's why it's cut off on top. I insert it in, and it turns the key, or it turns the lock, opens the lock. One thing to keep in mind here is that this is a deadbolt. And this deadbolt is not attached to the actual bolt, right? So a 3D printed key will twist this open because there's no resistance from the bolt having to be slid forward and backwards. One thing I could suggest if you're worried about snapping the key off in a lock is you can either use a tension wrench at the bottom, trim a little bit off the bottom of the 3D printed key with an X-Acto knife, and slide a thin tension wrench in, or a small screwdriver to assist the turn. Because when you actually throw a bolt, you're going to have a lot more weight behind it, and it's going to be a little more difficult to turn, and you don't want to bend or snap a 3D plastic key off inside the deadbolt lock. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I had this key, but what now? I have a 3D printed key. 3D printed keys are not durable. They will not last. So I was walking through my local hardware store, mine's Menards, and I saw the Key Me machine. And I'm not going to get into how much I hate this company and the ridiculous security options they offer. And by ridiculous, I mean they don't have them. So I had printed 2 keys on this machine. And what this is if you have a key, it'll duplicate your key for you unmanned. And you can see I'm entering this is a Schlage. It's a totally different key. I was testing at another time. It was a white filament. And we assume they use optics to scan this key for depths. And it misread the key. You'll see here in a second that it misread the first key, thinking it was something that it's not. And it failed. I had also printed this in a black or a dark gray PLA as well. And I'll show you that here in a second and how that works. So you can see it says here, this is a less common key. It thinks it's some weird Schlage, which it absolutely is not. So at this point, I was confused why it wasn't working. So I canceled out of this, and I decided I'm going to try again. And at this point, I went ahead and pulled the white key out, and I put the darker key in, and it definitely helps. So I would suggest if you're going to take this attack vector to the point where you want to try to get a real key made from it, that you use a darker PLA, don't use white, something that's going to be super reflective. So here's the dark gray key. I'm being very gentle shoving it in because it's got spring-loaded shutters on it, and I didn't want to snap it off inside there. And yes, you did see that correct. That is an NFC reader, RFID reader on one side, and it's got a fingerprint scanner on the other side. That fingerprint scanner's purpose, as horrible as this is that you can save all your key profiles in the cloud. So if you don't have your key with you, you can always come back and duplicate later. I don't want to get into the security implications of that. So you see that it's $1.99 to get a key duplicated here, standard brass. If you'd like, you can get your Mickey Mouse or Darth Vader key, but this is for testing purposes. So after tax, it was $2.12. This is the part where I turn the camera away as I insert my credit card to pay for this transaction. Sorry, this video is a bit of a lengthy video because it took me a minute. Before they had this Key Me, they used to have a machine called Minute Key. And I liked the Minute Key. It worked well. It was very simple. There wasn't all this extra save your data, all this different crap. They're trying to do an upsell here. I get a secondary key here for a few bucks cheaper. I'm like, no, I'm good. I just need to test to make sure this works. And then they want your email address so they can email your receipt, aka mark it to you. So, of course, you know me, I enter my real email address. And they want to know if you want to save your key for later. That's where the fingerprint comes in. Hell no. Moving on. So it starts going down this path where it starts updating you. So here's the concept. You have a 3D printed key that is not durable. However, I can take a 3D printed key, go to an unmanned key duplication system in the very back of a hardware store that is in my local town, and I can duplicate this key. Now you saw it does have the ability to do higher security keys than your standard Schlegs or quicksets or less common keys, we'll call it. To do that, though, they do ask for a mailing address because they cut it and then they mail it to you. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But if you have a standard Schleg, a standard quickset, or other master lock standard keys that are what this company considers common, it's going to cut this key in front of you and then dispense it out from the machine. And again, I have to definitely apologize the time of this video. The other thing is it says that it does have an Android and iOS app that it can scan your keys in home. I have not tested this, but I'm planning on it, where I'm wondering if I'm able to just set my key down on a desk and the app will scan it. So I'm going to be testing that in the future because if you could do that, if you had access to a physical key, you'd be set. Okay, so the key's done cutting. You can see it does an absolutely horrid job. You can see little pieces of flashing sticking off where it cut it. But nonetheless, you now have a real physical metal duplicated brass key of something you just 3D printed, which is awesome. So that concludes the 3D printing and cutting a key. Like I said, it's very simple. The hardest part is, well, let me rephrase that. If you have access to the key, this is dead simple. You get the measurements with the key gauge, you type it into keygen.co, you spit out an STL file and you print it, and you're done. You have a 3D printed key. You can take that to an unmanned key duplication, because if you go to a hardware store and ask a real person to cut this key, you might get a weird look. I'm considering trying that just to see what happens, if they'll even do it. But you'll have a physical key if you can go to an unmanned key duplication center. So now we're going to go into molding and casting a key, and this is where you start to feel a little more like James Bond or a spy in this case, because you're starting to do a little more covert, see it in the movies kind of stuff. And the cool part is you got to play with fire. So where did I get the idea to try this? So I've been wanting to try key duplication for a while now, but I'd always seen every video. You need a clamshell. You need something to put the clay in to mold this key in. And they're always milled or CNC'd out of like an aluminum or some kind of metal. And I didn't have access to that. I live in a very small city, like population 10,000 people. And I didn't know anyone. And if you were to send this off to be done, it would be kind of a high cost. And then DeviantOlaf put out a video on his YouTube channel, which if you're not subscribing, I don't know why. You absolutely should be subscribing to his videos. He put out a video and he talked about how you could absolutely 3D print this. So I went out and searched Thingiverse for a 3D printable clamshell. And lo and behold, I found one. And I'll get into who that's by here in a second. So once I saw that, Deviant talks about every little thing you need to cast a key. He goes step-by-step process on how to do this. So I watched his video, took inspiration from it, and tested it myself. And here's a link at the bottom, if you're seeing that, to his original key molding and casting video. If you don't know who DeviantOlaf is, there's his beautiful mug right there. His website is deviating.net, DeviantOlaf at Twitter. Check him out on Twitter for sure. So we're going to go over everything you need. There's a much higher bill of materials on this. So we'll just go through them one by one. I try to give you an idea of where you can get them off Amazon pretty cheap, and or the prices you can expect to pay. So in this case, you are going to need physical access to the key you're wanting to duplicate. If you prepare ahead of time, which I'll talk about in a second, you don't need much time. You maybe need like anywhere between 15 to 30 seconds hands-on with that key. Depending on what you're allowed to do on a job or your story for your job, you could get access to this key for like requesting access to a server room or wherever you're trying to access specifically. And you need that key, you may have just enough time to get the mold of that key. And again, I did this all with a quickset KW1 key. Then you're going to need a low melting point metal. So I do this demonstration at a lot of cons, and some of these cons have kids. One metal that Deviant talks about, and if you talk to other people, they suggest, is called woods metal. The problem with woods metal is that it has lead in it and other toxic chemicals that, when burnt, the fumes rise up and you're breathing these in. Woods metal is relatively cheap. You can get a lot of it for a very low cost. However, because I was going to have kids touching the metal after they're done, melting it themselves, all this different stuff, I didn't feel comfortable using a woods metal because of the toxins. And talking to some people in the TOOOL Slack, they suggested fields metal. Fields metal is much more expensive by weight. I was able to get a small little brick of it, probably about 2.5 to 3 inches by 3 inches by 1/4 of an inch thick, for about $35 off eBay. That's the exact link to the one I buy. This is a reputable buyer. He's got 100% positive feedback as of this presentation, and he's always sent me the products I've needed. I did a con in Omaha, Nebraska, and at that con I ordered 5 different bricks, and he got them to me, and he was willing to work with me on price, which I thought was awesome. So this is where I get my metal. It's fields metal. It's very low point metal, like the picture shows. It melts at about 144 degrees Fahrenheit, and it doesn't have the toxins in it. And then you're going to need something to melt that brick you get down, so you can make ingots. Deviant has some really cool big like melting pot that he bought. I looked it up on Amazon. I think it was like 35 or 40 bucks. He might have gotten it cheaper somewhere else. But I was walking through Walmart one day in the camping section, and I saw this cast iron skillet, and it was like $5. So I was willing to drop $5 on a cast iron skillet, which I bought. Obviously, I'll only use it for this purpose moving forward. And then Deviant had these perfectly square, small ingots of his metal. And it just so happened that this ingot was exactly the right amount of metal to mold and cast one single key. So I reached out to him on, I can't remember if it was Twitter or Slack, and talked to him, and he's like, "Oh, dude, it's awesome. They're these ice cube trays." So these are these silicone rubber ice cube trays that are meant to make tiny ice cubes. So you can drop them in the mouth of a bottle of water or soda, and they're super tiny. You can get them off Amazon, and you get 2 trays, which make a ton of ice cubes, or ingots in this case, and they're $10 for both of them. Again, these prices might be different now, especially with COVID going on. They could have completely changed because all prices and availability on Amazon are off the charts compared to what they used to be. But I got 2 of them for $10, so you can either use them both or use one for key casting and one for your ice cubes. Then you're going to need the clay, and the clay is what you actually mold the shape and the indent of the key into. And Sculpey is something that Deviant recommended. One tip: when you search Sculpting Clay on Amazon, select all the colors available. The reason I say this is that the price varies based on the color you select. I don't know. I don't get it. I've gotten yellow and green so far because they're usually between $2 to $3. But if you select like black or white or orange, it might be $7 to $10 for the same size, the 2-ounce size I buy here. This 2-ounce size, you can see from the picture, there's indents along each of the thing, and it pretty much, it's got 4 like logs of clay. 1 log of clay is exactly what you need to cast a key. So you get a minimum of 4 castings. I've found that you can reuse this clay over and over again. It does dry out over time. It is heat set. It's oven baked clay, so heat sets it and makes it hardened. So you're not going to get 100% reusability over and over again, and your results might vary. But I've gotten 4 or 5 keys out of a single piece of clay. But again, it all depends on how hot you heat your metal to before you pour it in. And then you're going to need some kind of talcum powder. I bought mine at Walmart. I bought the little baby powder. It's a little size about this big. It's a travel size baby powder, and it's perfect. And this just stops the clay from sticking to itself. So when you cast take the 2 pieces of the clamshell and stick them together, when you pull them apart, they separate without the clay sticking together and ruining your whole mold. Then you're going to need the clamshell. I 3D printed mine from Thingiverse, ZBZZN Boris. is the person who created this. There's a bit.ly link I created to link straight to the Thingiverse link for that. It works absolutely perfect. It's 3 pieces. You're going to have a left and a right to your clamshell, and then a base. And this base is awesome. In Deviant's video, he had an aluminum one, I believe, and then he used like a C-clamp to clamp it to hold it together and like kind of stabilize it on the table. This base you print for it works absolutely perfect. I love this clamshell. I've used it over 100 times, and there's no deformation. It absolutely does not deform. It holds up to the heat. You have to realize that when you print PLA, you print at a minimum usually of 190 degrees Celsius to 220 degrees Celsius. And we're only hitting around 140 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, unfortunately, I use American units. I wish we'd switch to metric and Celsius, but I don't understand it off the top of my head. So you could do the conversion, but the point is you never get close to that melting temperature or the glass temperature of the filament, so you're going to be absolutely fine. Then you're going to need a melting ladle. This thing was like $10 off Amazon. It's for melting lead, casting ammunition, things along those lines. It was $10 on Amazon. It fits a perfect ingot inside of it, and you can hold a lighter underneath it to melt that down. Then you're going to need a lighter. Deviant suggested a torch lighter. I do as well. I think it puts out a little more heat than just a standard lighter. But I've tested with Fields Metal. You can use like a tea candle or a standard Bic lighter or a Zippo lighter. It will get it hot enough over time. It's just not as fast. If you're like me and you like a cigar every now and again, I already own a cigar lighter. I bought this one off Amazon for $15 like years ago for the purpose of actually having cigars. It just so happened to work perfectly for this situation as well. So this is a video of me trying not to upset my wife. This is the $5 cast iron skillet I bought from Walmart with the brick of metal, of Fields Metal I bought off of eBay. And I'm slowly just melting it down inside this pan. I make a very noob mistake here. Do not make my mistake. I took a kebab skewer and I was making sure it was fully melted. And kind of stirring it around to make sure there was no more chunks of metal, that it was 100% completely melted on my stove. And then to make sure, I, like an idiot, swirl it around in the pan like you would with butter if you're about to fry a steak. And what I do is I just coat my entire pan with Fields Metal. So I lost a bit of metal because of that. But like I said, I'm not using this pan for anything but melting Fields Metal in the future. So it works perfectly. I put the wax paper underneath the ice cube tray in case I spilt. That's the only person I have that there. If I didn't overspill, it would land on the wax paper and not my stove, and my wife would still love me. So I quickly just pour this in here. And you can see that I got a whole bunch of full cube pours and then a whole bunch of random ones. And then you can see the cubes it makes. I think I got about 16 cubes out of that one piece of metal. So that's enough for 16 keys. One note, when I poured into this ice cube tray, it doesn't fully fill all the cubes. So what I did is I popped them all out. Anything that was a full cube, I set aside. Anything that was a partial cube, I took into my melting ladle. I melted it down, all the little fragments, little pieces, and then I slowly poured them in cube by cube until I got a full ingot for each one. So that's just a little pointer there. So now we're going to switch to demo time, aka time to play with fire. Don't try this at home, or if you do, just don't blame me if you get hurt. I highly suggest you try this at home. Full disclosure, I've had this demo pre-recorded for a time because it's one of those things that with COVID going on, I've done a lot of virtual conferences. And with a virtual conference, it's just difficult to plan ahead. So I pre-recorded the actual demonstration of this video. So you're going to see here the background's going to change. My hat you won't see my face. It's going to be all on table kind of thing, but you're going to see the whole demonstration. So we're going to do that demonstration, and then I'll come back right after that. Enjoy. Okay, so I'm going to get started with my demo here. I'm going to go over what I have here on the table. So some of the things you're going to need. The first thing is a clamshell. This is what we're going to use to actually mold the key. This is actually 3D printed. It's fully available for free download off thingiverse.com. And I'll try to make sure the links are available. They're definitely available in the slides, which I'll also make available to everybody. So we have the main clamshell and the base. The base is pretty much so you don't have to hold this as you're pouring molten metal into it.
It just lets you freehand it. Speaking of pouring molten metal, the next thing we have here is a ladle, and this is a lead ladle. You could use this for pouring lead, but it works perfectly for what we're doing. So we'll be pouring the metal into the clamshell like that. The next thing we're going to need is some sculpting clay. This is Sculpty. It's like a few bucks on Amazon for this package. This package is pre-split into 4 different bars, and you just need 1 bar is exactly perfect to fill this mold. You rip that 1 bar in half and you fill each half of the mold. It works perfect. You're going to need some baby powder, some talcum powder. I buy this nice little jar or nice little bottle from Walmart. It's like $1 something, just because it's small and convenient. And I travel with all this stuff in this like pencil bag I found one time at Walmart during school shopping time. It's like $1 or $2 for this zipper bag, and it holds everything I need. You're gonna need a lighter. I suggest a torch or a cigar lighter. This is a cigar lighter. You can't really see the flame on camera, I'm guessing, but that's what that is. And then I also have the metal. So there's different kinds of metals you can use for this. A very common, popular one is called woods metal. The problem with woods metal is that it contains lead, so it's toxic. The fumes it puts off are toxic. So I would highly suggest against it if you're going to be doing this around kids or in the public. For your own use, that's up to you. You decide if that's okay with you. This is Fields metal. Fields metal is non-toxic. I get mine off Amazon, and it's like $35 for a brick. And 1 brick makes pretty much enough to fill this little sleeve here. So about 16 little cubes, which you saw in the previous video that I made, melting it into a pan and then pouring it in this mini ice cube tray. So let's get into molding an actual key. So I have this lock. It's a quick set lock, and here's the key for that lock. Works perfect. So this is the key we're going to mold. So to get started, I'm going to move some stuff out of the way here. First thing I'm going to do is get my clamshell opened up and laid flat in front of me. And I'm going to open my clay. Now I try to open this nicely so that I can kind of wrap it back in the clay later. That's only because I'm doing it for demo purposes. This doesn't really matter. I've actually 3D printed a holder for this clay just because I like to be organized with my stuff, especially in 3D printing. So if you look at this again, you can see that there's, it's maybe hard to see, but you can see how there's these lines that pre-cuts it into these bars. And this 1 bar is exactly the right shape. So if I take this bar and break it in half, or relatively in half, like so, this is exactly perfect for each side. So just take one and mash it up just like Play-Doh, soften it up just a little bit. And then what you're going to do, and it's up to you. Some people like to take talcum powder and put this in so the clay comes out easier. For demo, I don't really care. If you needed to do multiple back-to-back, maybe that would make sense. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. Anyways, I get it into about a shape like that, and then I just push it down into the clamshell. And try to get it as flat as possible. So I'm pushing it down in, I'm backfilling this big gap at the top, the big void at the top. And you want it to be as level with the top of this as possible. You don't want a big bulge of clay sticking up because it won't give you a good mold. It'll wrap around the key, which you do not want. So get this as flat as you can. Again, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. When you squish these two together, you're probably going to get some leak out. That's fine. Just get it as best as you can. So you can see I have that. It's pretty level. It's hard to see on camera, but it's pretty level. Now this part, you're going to want to depress this down in like so to create a well, because you need some place to pour the molten metal into. So I'm creating like this lip that I can bend backwards, and it's just this well, because the top of the key doesn't need to be molded. That's not important. So pretty much you do this again and just repeat it on the other side. So I'm going to take the clay and again soften it up by squishing it. And you want to make sure that you go above the border here. You want that lump, and then you want to press it down to flatten it out. Otherwise, if you try to like skim it in, you might get an air pocket below, and when you squish the key in, all the clay moves down and you won't get a good impression. Okay, so I've pushed it all down in, and I still have a bulge. So now I'm going to work on getting that bulge down so it's not above the plane of the top of the clamshell. And again, I'm going to fill this void in on the top. People have asked me if the color of clay matters. It doesn't. Literally, if you go on Amazon, one day one color is cheaper than the other color. So sometimes you'll see this in yellow, sometimes you'll see it in green, black, red, blue. It doesn't matter. It is literally just whatever's the cheapest I buy, because why pay $8 or $5 for red when green is $1.99? So, okay, so I have that pretty well in there. I'm going to check to make sure I don't have it too low. And I think I'm good. Now I'm just going to, again, create that well on the top with my thumb, squishing it back. So I create a lip, and when I put these two together, it'll create a pour spout, kind of like this, that the metal can go down in. So now the next important part is to cover these two pieces, or these two sides, in talcum powder, so that when you push the two clays together and you separate them, that they separate and they don't just stick into one big glob of clay. So you just take a little talcum powder and sprinkle it on both sides here. And then just take your finger and rub that talcum powder across the top of all the clay.
is, so after you get the key mold, do you then need to clean your key?
Okay, so I'm going to assume he's talking about when you're molding the key. So yes, depending specifically on your warding and the bittings of the key, some clay could get trapped inside there. The good news is that when you apply the talcum powder over the clay, a lot of the times it's also acting, not only is it working as a release for the clay from the clay, it actually puts a protective barrier kind of between the key and the clay. So it also helps almost as being. Think of it like a large safety pin in a way that's been less sharpened, so you don't poke yourself with it, and just scraping stuff out. But it's very rare. Like if you're doing a standard quick set, a standard schleg, or anything like that, you're probably not going to have that issue.
So if they want to actually clean it, is there something you recommend other than a little scraper? Is there any sort of solvent they need to use or anything that's not going to damage any of their products?
I mean, if you're worried about someone feeling like clay residue, have some isopropyl alcohol. I mean, it's gonna get it right off. But again, and if you want it to be a convenient carry along, just make sure you have some of those little packets, the rip open single use swabs of alcohol. Again, I don't think it's going to be that necessary unless, I mean, if you're doing this actually on a job live and you have a eagle-eyed person that gave you the key and they're going to inspect it when they get it back, I think you'll be fine.
All right, so let's go to our next question. I apologize, this is about half a question, so I have to interpret this. Um, Remdog Cap would like to know, or would like to say, if the key scanner app is any good, it would be a great improvement over making a mold. And in Red Team Ops, and that's where the question ends. I'm assuming what he's going to say is, and in Red Team Ops, it's important to not leave anything behind. So, how do you feel about using the key scanner app versus making a mold?
When you say key scanner app, are you talking about the reference I made that Key Me machine has an app?
Yes, I believe that is what they are asking you.
Okay, so I haven't fully tested the app yet, so I can't comment on the app specifically. But unless you're on a short-term engagement, if you can get the keys bitting to make your own 3D printed key, and you can buy some small 3D printers now that you could literally take on an engagement with you and have for like in a hotel room. It takes 15 minutes to print a key. It takes about 15 minutes to make a key at the Key Me machine. It's always better, in my opinion, to have a real key. So if you told me I have a full day. Thing that raises some eyebrows.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions from the audience. Do you have anything that we've got a few minutes? Is there anything else you want to follow up with the people on? Do you want to add any more information that you didn't have a chance to get to?
Yeah. So it's Brett, but I think it's Mooch. Does he go by Mooch? Is that his tag? I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyways, if you check him out on Twitter, I think it's Mooch with O's. I need to look it up. He did a great at his job. He was working on a project where he was using telephoto lenses with cameras and working on getting photographs of keys at over 400 yards, I want to say, and getting them clear enough. So that's things to keep in mind with this, like how dangerous it is and simple it is to go from a photo of a key to a physical key. And I mean, for me, the molding and casting part of this video I did mostly because I wanted to let people know it's easy. Like, this isn't hard. If someone tells you specifically, these are the items you need, here's where you buy them, here's how you do it.
my holdup for the longest time was I couldn't get a clamshell. And when I saw Deviant's video on just 3D print one, and then Boris had created one for free on Thingiverse, I'm like, cool, I can actually jump into this because everything else is cheap. But my passion of this is the 3D printed side of the key. I love 3D printing. It's something I do for just fun, hobby, and as a side gig. So the fact that you can 3D print these keys is amazing. And one thing that if you have the ability to do so, I highly suggest you check out the repo for the GitHub repo for the Kimi, or not Kimi, sorry, the KeyGen, because they will take requests. Like, you can create a key. So let's say there's a specific Medico key or a specific Schlage key or whatever, any key you can think of that's not on that site already. Submit it to them and they will add it. So you can help grow the ability of the types of keys, the wordings, the brands of keys that we could one day 3D print. So like, I think it'd be awesome to get a Boley key up there. Like, I don't think it would be that difficult to 3D print one of those keys and make it work. And I think that would be an amazing thing to get up there. So I'm myself trying to learn the coding format to make that key, and they make it pretty easy for you. So
that is fantastic. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to Key Duplication. It's not just for the movies, and that was presented by ByteStealer. So, thank you so much for doing this presentation for us. We really appreciate it. And if anybody has any other questions, please come to the LPV general text, ask your questions, and we can work on filtering them right to them to get you the right answers.
Awesome. Thanks.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.